Price. I am councillor for Barnoldswick and Forage.
I'm David Jacob Price. I'm also councillor for Barnoldswick.
I am Fraz Ahmed. I'm a councillor for Malden and Whitefield.
Councillor Handy for Briarfield.
Councillor Zafar Ali for Briarfield East and Cloverhill.
I'm Neil Watson, I'm a service manager with Pendle.
Well, I'm Philip Molson, I'm the council's corporate director.
Thank you everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity of... Have we missed someone?
Oh,
James.
it's
Sorry. No, you're the most important person.
I'm Jane Watson, I'm the committee administrator for this meeting.
Thanks, Jane. I want to take this opportunity of welcoming Rose Grouse, who's our new Chief Exec from the Council. I'm sure Rose will be a major team player here in Pendle, and look forward to working with Rose and deal with all the challenges we have here. So, any apologies? We've got a full house, haven't we? So.
Yeah, Councillor Iqbal.
Okay, and you've got this up, yeah. Councillor Iqbal, yeah. Declarations of interest. Okay. Any interest to declare? No? Okay. Item 2 is public question time. This is any questions from members of the public on any items which are not on the agenda. So not on the agenda, I don't think there's anybody else. Okay. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Yes,
one thing missed off on note number 64, transfer of facilities and services. If you remember, when we had our list of assets and services in subsection 1, we also mentioned the ACE Centre in Nelson as well. So
we did.
we had that here.
Yeah, that's fine. So isn't that, yeah, okay, isn't that, I'll move the minutes. Okay, that's fine. What I'm going to do, if it's okay with colleagues, is rejig the agenda because we do have a speaker on the item, which is the last item actually on the agenda, which is item referred to from area committees. So we have a speaker on this item. It's Christine Collard from Salford Parish Council. So Christine, the floor's yours. You've got up to 5 minutes to speak on this item.
Sorry, we thought we were at the end. Sorry.
No, we don't want to keep you waiting.
That's fine, right. Oh gosh.
Sorry.
Did enjoy the meeting?
Yeah.
God, right, yeah. I'm a bit last minute to this because the person who was his birthday couldn't make it tonight, so I must apologise.
No, don't worry, I'll take your time.
If I get on and I'm quite nervous. And some of the speeches his and I have altered the place, I'm sorry, but I've been this minute. Christine Collard, Salford Parish Council. It is with some annoyance that we find ourselves having to attend this meeting this evening. I'll give you some background information regarding this item. The trees in question are adjacent to the main road from Salford in an area known as Klondike. Last May we were dismayed to learn that premature ash trees have been served with a 5-day removal notice. Each tree has a TPO on them. We contacted members of the West Craven Area Committee who managed to put an immediate halt to this action. An item was put on the committee agenda for the trees to be discussed, following which it was decided that Salford Parish Council could get another survey done by a qualified tree surgeon. The parish employed JCA Associates. Their report basically said that despite the ash trees showing ash dieback, with judicial pruning and annual inspections, this is a legal requirement, that there was no immediate danger to road users, either pedestrians or vehicular. Sorry, I've been struggling with that one all day. This was reported back to the committee. Pendle said they hadn't time to digest this report but would contact JCA to discuss the findings. It was assumed that both parties would be in agreement and the trees would not need to be felled. 2 further meetings took place and nothing had been reported back in this time. Then, on the 29th of September, a series of questions were sent to JCA by Pendle, with the instructions that Pendle Council needed responses as soon as possible for the forthcoming West Craven Area Committee. JCA answered all the questions more than adequately. Approximately mid-afternoon on the day of the West Craven Area Committee on the 5th of October, we received an email saying that in interest of health and safety that the trees had to come down. To say we are displeased is an understatement. We believe this set unwanted precedents regarding the borough's trees. What part of JCA's assessment are you not happy with? We are trying to reach a positive solution and feel we are not being met halfway on this. One of our parish councils have taken it upon themselves to count the number of ash trees that appear to be in a worse condition than these trees and are presenting a much bigger health and safety threat than the trees at Klondike. Just in West Craven there appears to be 45 trees in worse condition, and heading out of Bracewell several trees appear to need immediate action. There has already been 5 trees in this vicinities that have been felled illegally, which have tree POs on them. They have not been replaced, and 3 of them weren't even ash trees, which is really sad. In total, 8 trees within the whole of the village with TPOs on them have been felled and not replaced. I ask this committee to spare the trees in line with the recommendation of pruning and annual inspection, or go for a 3rd independent report. I think the trees contribute a significant illogical value to this landscape, and I'm a bit of a tree hugger and I'm not apologising for that, and I hope that you consider these trees. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, can I bring Neil in, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. A number of points raised there. We brought the trees are our trees. Okay, so we have a responsibility as landowners for those trees, and a report was given to us which we on our annual maintenance, which we had to have regard to, and that's what led to the request, if you will, to fell the trees. It came to committee. Our view has always been the same as officers. Our professional advice has been that the trees have a low life expectancy. Clearly there was a lot of concern about that, and the decision was made, if you will, that an independent report that was requested by the community. I've got to say it wasn't us who requested that as an authority. That was the community seeking that to see if the trees could remain. We did get that report back. Christine mentioned a number of issues that were still outstanding. There are matters in that we're not happy with. For example, they've got ash dieback. Ash dieback, Forestry Commission will say their life expectancy is a maximum of 5 years, and yet the report says 30 years. That is unaccounted for, and we don't see that as being an issue. As a responsible authority, we went to our insurers, because if something does happen, then we need to make sure whether we are or not insured, and the insurance company has come back to say if we decide to keep them, we won't be insured because of the risks associated with that, and they were aware of the reports. Just last point, going on to other trees. Every landowner is responsible for their trees. We're not the responsible body for every tree in the borough. Every landowner's got their own responsibilities. So there are other trees. They may be in a parlous condition, but we don't have that responsibility to maintain those directly ourselves. Hence, I think it's an unfair comparison saying they're all in worse condition. They are the responsibility of those landowners. You've got the reports here. Lee Johnson, who is leaving us now, it's not really an issue, but he's been very good and he's very professional, still stands by the first report. His view is that the trees, the work can be done, but it will be constant and will be in the same position in 12 months' time.
Thanks for that. Councillor Witt?
Thank you, Chairman. I've been concerned about this since being contacted by Salford Parish Council many months ago, and in fact I think it was in February, certainly there weren't any leaves on the trees when this issue first arose. I'll take one step back. Pendle Council's ownership in that vicinity is as a result of this authority, working with the then neighbouring landowner and the parish council, creating a footpath behind the headline. And Pendle Council owns a narrow strip of the field which is adjacent to the highway. And people won't remember him, it was Councillor Tim Hay, who was an Early councillor at the time, that organised that. An issue that I've realised only within the last couple of weeks is in terms of the ash trees, whether they are on Pendle Council land or whether they are actually on the highway. Now, Philip will say, well, they're probably all to the middle of the highway or whatever the case may be. But the highways extend from fence to fence. And I went to check, following the last area committee, to see whether indeed the trees were within that highway fence line, and they are. And I've got pictures on my phone if anybody wants to look at them. So clearly, the trees may be on Pendle Council land, depending on how you define where the boundary of the land is, but they are certainly highway trees. And highway trees are always the responsibility, first and foremost, of the highway authority, the county council. So we may have been chasing our tails in terms of getting reports, looking at these trees, when actually it was for the county council to look at those trees. Now, if the county council did look at those trees, and I don't know whether that's happened or not, and certainly in the first instance, Lee Johnson would be the person who would carry out inspections on behalf of the county council. Those trees at Klondike are probably the best conditioned ash trees on the whole of the length from Saltford to Earley. And if you go closer to Northam, you find that there are a lot of highway trees which are in worse condition. So therefore, if Lancashire County Council as Highway Authority were to risk assess the situation on Earley Road, and I'm not suggesting that they should do, but if they did, then these trees would be well down the pecking order, or well down the chopping order. There would be others which would be higher priority. The reason why I asked for this to come to Policy Resources is because of the wider implications across the borough. In effect, Pendle Council has had advice from its insurers that because there is one report which says, well, there's a risk with these trees, then the insurers won't insure them. The problem is that Pendle Council as landowner, disregarding the highway trees, ones that are not within Pendle Council's land ownership, if you look across Pendle, there are risks associated with all those trees. And if you go to the nth degree and you go to a consultant and say, well, can you assure me that there's no risk from these trees? Of course, the consultants will turn around and say, well, yes, there is always a risk. So therefore, are we going to go down a rabbit hole which means that all the trees on Pendle Council's land have to be felled because there is a risk? The reality is, in the case of these trees, that risk is much smaller than the risk of other trees in the very close vicinity shedding a limb onto the highway. And these trees have some big limbs over the highway, trees further down the road have big limbs over the highway. Those trees further down the road are suffering much worse from ash dieback. Just to pick up on the point that Neil made about the 30-year lifespan, there's quite a lot of recent reports which seem to indicate that older, more mature trees are more resistant to ash dieback than younger ones, and there's quite a lot of empirical evidence to show that that's the case. Just travelling up and down, I noticed that the young trees generally have just been wiped out, whereas the older trees, you can see evidence of the dieback, but it's not so extensive as to pose a risk. So, Chairman, I think as a Policy Resources Committee we need to take a balance view across the borough. I think we are at risk of acting disproportionately in this case. I, at the very least, would like a third tiebreaker tree consultant to come in. Both Bowland Consultancy, who acted for Pendle Council, and the consultancy that the Parish Council have commissioned are acting as independently. They haven't got to steer from somebody, but they've come to different conclusions. So, if it's the case that there's a disagreement amongst consultants, let's get a third opinion. And I mean, I would be prepared to abide by that, although I do think in the first instance, if anybody wants to take it up with the County Council, that should be the first port of call, because they are highway trees, and whether they're on Pendle Council land or not, they're still considered to be highway trees. And so, Chairman, I would move, go for a third opinion, and I'll leave silent the issue of going to the County Council, but I think anybody within any sense would want to do that.
Okay, thank you. Before I bring Sarah in, just a general point in terms of the wider implications across Pendle. I think each case is decided on its own merits, so I think it'd be wrong to imply that just because we make a particular decision in this specific case doesn't mean necessarily that will be the same for other trees across Pendle necessarily. So I think each case is decided on its own merits. But I think a couple of fundamental points have been raised in terms of what the insurers have said, our insurers, and secondly, the implications of the trees being on highway. Is it LCC? Is it us? So I just want clarification as to the implications of that. Is it Lancashire County Council? Is it us?
I've not checked the land registry, but as far as that, my staff are concerned, it is on our land. But I do take Councillor Witt's point, it's not a hedge to hedge, so it wouldn't take long just to clarify that.
So
that was going to be my starting point too. Are we 100% sure that it's not the County Council? Apart from which, if it is them, then it's their bill. Establishing my credibility as a fellow tree hugger and owner of quite a few trees on our modest plot. Recently, I had a lot of interaction with our wonderful tree officer who we're sadly losing. And we have ups and downs with trees. So a few years ago, I had a stand of horse chestnuts. They looked terrific. They were oozing what looked like just the most revolting stuff, sort of like dripping down. They lost half their leaves. They didn't set conkers. I thought it was the end. Lee Johnson came, looked at them. He said, you know what? They might spontaneously recover. They looked terrible. I thought, I don't think he's being a bit hopeful here. Sure enough, 3-4 years later, the horse chestnuts spontaneously recovered. But very recently, we asked him to come and look at some other trees, and we said, I wonder whether we could cut these back. And he said, oh no. He said, that has orange tips to the and say, you're so lucky because you're in a sort of bubble, there isn't any Dutch elm disease near you, they'll probably be fine your elm trees. And it's because either all the elm trees have died in the past or responsible owners have cut them down, so the Dutch elm disease has not to be a responsible council. There is the sort of health and safety element of people being endangered, but I think more importantly, we shouldn't be fostering a terrible disease like
is that it's Pendle Council land, but they're highway trees. For my learning, what does that mean? How can it be our land and highway trees? So could you just expand for us, novices?
In simple terms, landowners generally own the land to the centre of an adjacent highway. The highway authority, in this case county council, own 2 spade depths below the surface of the highway. And if ever that highway was stopped up, the ownership of the land reverts back to the adjacent landowners of frontages. That's a bit simple, and there's solicitors in the room, they could explain it far better than I, but probably more expensively. So the county council, in practice, examines any trees that are planted in the highway and takes appropriate action if they need to deal with them. Chairman, can I just ask if Councillor Neath is seconding my original proposal?
Yeah. I was going to ask the next question. I mean, it's obviously with Barfield, we've done a bit of work on trees. It is a very difficult scenario to look at. Every tree is different, to be honest. What I need to understand here is that who's actually responsible. That's been posed. Do we own them, or is county owns them? And I think that's the key question before any resolutions can be made. Okay, to chop them or not chop them. I mean, if there is if there is a disease there, then obviously it needs to go. But more importantly there, the question is, who's the owners? Because every time we have tree issues in Blyfield, and I've spoken to Lee, the first thing he says to me, Hanif, who owns them? And they're the curbs. Okay? And most of the time they're counties, they're not Pendles. They're always counties. 99% of the time, all the tree issues that have appeared, and there have been many in Blyfield, okay, from trimming, from other issues, from whatever, wasps, whatever you want to call it, yes? So my experience is that most of these trees belong to county. So I was just quite surprised that Lee, who I respect quite a lot, and is unfortunately is leaving, every time, obviously that's the case. So I'm just, my question, Chair, today is, shouldn't we, before we make any resolutions to chop anything down, and if we need to, we need to, that's a separate question, identify who the ownership is, and let the owners then make that decision. That might still fall back on us. I think I would suggest that we go there and ask that question. And from that angle, I second the Council Whip's proposal.
Could I alter my suggestion, which is that we delegate to the council to cut down these trees if it is proved that these trees are in fact Pendle's responsibility, and if it's not, then obviously we don't.
That kind of alleviates your...
It sort of suggests that Councillor Hanif should be seconding my motion.
I'm just going to bring Philip in for any further advice that we might need on this point.
Well, I mean, obviously there is this question mark about who owns the trees. I mean, I must admit I was given to understand that there were certainly Pendle's trees. There's obviously some doubt being cast on that tonight. I think if they are, the legal advice based on what our discussions with the insurers is that if they are Pendle's trees, we should them. And I think we should stick. I think Councillor Sullivan plans to suggest we make the inquiries to who owns them, and if they are Pendle's, then we go ahead and move them.
Is that okay? Yeah. You happy with that? Councillor Whip?
Yeah, Chairman, I mean, this is really sad because I think you really need to go and look at these trees at the very least before, issuing an order of execution. You can't see it very well, but these are magnificent trees just down below Klondike. These show that these pictures here show the fence line. There's the highway. There is the tree. Clearly a highway tree. Fence line, tree, highway. These trees form a crucial part of the scenic views going from Saltford towards Earby and through Klondike. And as Christine said earlier on, we had trees on the opposite side of the highway removed without any permissions by a new landowner, and trees in the field behind these removed by the landowner without any permissions. And you are looking at a systematic cull of trees in that part of Saltford, which will be devastating. And beyond that, I think you're on the slippery slope of risk-averse
I mean, certainly I'm no tree expert as such, but we have had field advice from officers, we've had these reports, and we've had legal advice in terms of our responsibilities as well. There are concerns, of course, around land ownership. Sarah's motion, I think, does address that clearly, because it is subject to the trees being on county council's land. So I think the concerns which Councillor Hanif raised and other members have raised, I think they are addressed in the motion that's on the table.
Chairman, may I just make one point?
Of course, yeah.
It's just generally about trees. It seems like we're against keeping them. I agree with Councillor Whitley. There are magnificent trees there. It's just the safety. Going through Lee's work when he's going, this year, in the next 3 years, we're planting 21,000 trees. So we're not anti-trees as a council. This is about the danger to the public.
No. And, yes, it's a good point which Neil's made, and I think it's about the risk management and our tree management in Pendle as well. And part of it is when there are issues like this, that they are addressed at the same time as planting new trees. Councillor Matt Hunter?
Yeah, I might be wrong, but up to now, what the intelligence I've gained is that if they are county trees, they will come down. In fact, the county have been quite active in trying to control the spread of ash dieback in Lancashire, but I might be wrong there. So we want to be careful, I think, in that respect.
Thank you.
Chairman, you only need to travel down the A59. There are thousands of trees with ash dieback, some of which are completely dead, lining the A59. You go along the lanes, you go along the roads in West Craven and in other parts of Pendle. Ash dieback is rampant, and judging by any standards, if you look at these trees and compare them to others with ash dieback, these are in far better condition. And if you're going to pass the amendment that's been put, then I would move a further amendment asking you to go and have a site visit and actually see how good these trees are, and to do it in the next couple of weeks before all the leaves come off.
At the moment, there's only one motion on the table.
No, I moved
There is
and
a
seconded.
But Councillor Hanif withdrew it after Sarah was...
Yeah, no.
Because Councillor Hanif's concern was around ownership of land. And that's been addressed in the motion.
Councillor Honey should be asked if he's withdrawn.
Sorry, I thought you...
No, I think I would, to be honest, I'm a tree lover, and you know, it's
We
it's
all
not
are.
that.
No one's saying you're not.
I know you're not. So it's a difficult one in the sense I want to support the parish as well. So would it make a big difference if we just go and have a pay visit and have a look? I'm just saying, at the same time, we can ask county whose tree they belong to. I'm just posing the question. So a few weeks will it make? I mean, obviously, I don't want. I understand the insurance questions. I understand all these things. I'm just saying is that if we can find something to help and save and support the parish and everybody else, and these are mature trees, you know, as much as we plant 21,000, and I'm all for planting, it's going to be taking another 80, 90 years to get into that level. So I'm just saying, if county say they need to go, I agree with that, but does it harm us if we just have a visit, ask the questions, and then make that decision? That's the chair, so for that reason only, I'll support, obviously, Councillor Whip.
Can I just respond very briefly before I bring Neil in? I mean, having a site visit, I believe, isn't going to be helpful, because looking at these trees will look beautiful. I'm not saying they won't. but we're not the experts. By me, for example, looking at the tree, I'm not going to be able to determine whether there is a problem with that tree or not. I'm not an expert.
Yeah, I'm just not comfortable just passing everything to the officers, to be honest. If we get county feedback, I'd rather have that discussion instead of giving the authority to officers. And that's where I was...
We make a decision, we're not giving authority, we're only giving authority on the
when,
basis of who owns the land.
I don't know what, so I'll rather have the feedback. And
no, but
can't we discuss it? Can't we do that and discuss it 1 month later at the next meeting? Is there such an urgency, if you don't want me asking Neil, to make that decision today? Can't we move it to next month and get all these things?
Chairman, I was going to say what you said. If I looked at a tree, I wouldn't know whether it's healthy or not. And looking at it doesn't...
No.
You have to look at fungi and how it's structured and branches and all. That there is a real expertise in that. But what we are saying as officers and the people we employed are saying that there is a danger now. You can do some work and try and alleviate that, and we're saying it will get worse, but I wouldn't advocate waiting, because some work needs to be done on those trees now. So I think we will be passing the book down the line, and we should be making decisions on it now.
So, Chair, I think you've got 2 proposals. You need to take your party's proposal and obviously...
Well, nobody seconded mine, if you haven't.
No, it was seconded by David.
So we've got an amendment, and then we'll have to come back to the proposal. We'll take the amendment first. All those in favour of Sarah's amendment? Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. We'll move on back to the agenda now. This is item 4. This is investment in leisure facilities. We've got a report and then the notes from the calling meeting. We've had discussion on the leisure facilities at last month's meeting. The report now is saying that the review that will be undertaken will be broad and wide-ranging. There's going to be an open mind as to what the report will be looking at in terms of the review. It's absolutely crucial that the review does take place, because Sport England will only support us and possibly provide funding if this review is undertaken. So I'll open up to members now. Councillor David Price.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, essentially this is basically asking, it's the same list as was presented before. We highlighted some that obviously appeared critical to life, death, health, safety, etc. I think it's one of those ones whereby the recurring theme has been over many years that the Leisure Trust highlight these emergency repairs, critical repairs, and they're always critical and they're always there. But I think one of the things that we're starting to learn is obviously there should be a much longer term programme. We as councillors, I'm sure I've got your support on this one, we all want to see those leisure centres survive. They're valuable to each of our towns, the 3 towns we've got, the big ones. They've got facilities in them. We want to see them healthy, we want to see them in good repair. They're all at a certain age. I think even the national government and Sport England are acknowledging this on a national scale. They're all at a certain age, simple fact. So they do need some repairs for sure. So we would definitely support repairs, but what we want to do is part of this sort of fundamental review of what exactly is the future structure of the Leisure Trust and its activities. As paragraph 7 says, and as the Chairman clarified, the scope of the report, also noted in paragraph 8, the scope is a broad-ranging one, looking at effective and sustainable physical activity. Sustainable is a key word there. At the moment, the Leisure Trust costs the council, putting a budget working group hat on here, it costs the council a lot of money. It is one of the 3 big areas of expenditure of the council. And therefore, understanding how it will operate before then throwing money at it in the very short term is what you have to do. You have to understand what's going to happen. Otherwise, like all the amounts of money allocated over the last 5, 10 years or so, they've always been relatively expensive sticking plasters. Things about repairing ceilings and the like, there's no point repairing a ceiling unless you know what's causing it. If it's coming from the roof above, the same thing will happen. If it's coming from the water below, the same thing will happen. So doing those sorts of repairs are not going to solve things. So I think what we need to do is we need to maintain the resolution we had last time round, which is basically, yes, we are still considering the remaining works set out in Appendix A, but we do need the budget working group review. That needs to look at the whole of the Leisure Trust and how much support and where the support is given by the Council, and also understand the progress and definition of this study by the Leisure Trust using Max Associates. Having had a look through their strategic outcomes planning model, some of the headlines of that one, I think one of the things we need to probably do is the suggestion of having councillors and our new chief exec and other members of council staff involved, I think is the right thing to do, because we need to steer that to get the right answer. If we just let the previous Max Associates report was very good at setting the leisure centres activities in the context of some broader Lancashire, which is not really what we're interested in. You know, if you live in Cone, you go to the Cone Leisure Centre. If you live in West Cone, you go to the West Cone. You don't tend to go to Hyndburn or Accrington or Preston just to go for some activity. So it's all about how it's used locally by the populations and how it is sustainable. That's the key thing. So I think this bigger review, I know having had discussions with the interim finance officer about some of the areas that we can look to consider as a budget working group, obviously we discussed this the other day, it's one of those ones whereby we need the Leisure Trust to start thinking about what they're doing, and we need also to challenge them a bit in terms of what they do, how they do it, how it's funded, etc. And therefore you get a full idea of what the longer term future is for the leisure centres and the other activities of the Leisure Trust. So, in summary, I think we looking at the recommendations, I think we certainly acknowledge the need for the strategic review to take place. That, as the chairman points out, is a prerequisite to accessing the grant funding by Sport England. So we must do the review. We want the review to be the right kind of framework structure, ask the right questions, dig in the right areas to give us the right answers that will help us to come up with something that is a sustainable provider of health activities. I think nominating 3 members, I think that's a good idea. If we have to come up with names, I think we can come up with some on our side. And considering allocation of further funding, I think I suggest that we maintain our resolution from before, which is that further discussions need to take place. As we highlighted before, the Conservative group councillors did go on a tour of the sites to understand some of the problems with the facilities, the way they operate, looking at ideas for expanding revenues, looking at areas to cut costs. Even, for example, let's talk about boiler replacements. There's lots of grounds now for boiler replacement. I hope we're not just going to say, take out that gas boiler and put another gas boiler straight back in again. You know, there's lots of clever ways to do it, lots of grants available. So let's look at this in the round, rather than just rushing in again for some expensive sticking plasters. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Before I bring over the speaker, I've just got a couple of questions, if I may. In terms of, on page 3, it refers to the council's responsibility as the landlord. So some of these works are our responsibility. See, that's the provision within the lease, I take it. Surely you think in a long lease, the responsibility will lie on the tenant. So just want clarification on that, in terms of what our responsibilities are as the landlord. Philip, I don't know if you know.
Responsibilities are basically for the main structure. The tenant's responsibilities are for the equipment and other things inside. I mean, you did at the last meeting, except about the roof on the leisure centre, which is part of the structure. I think of the ones that are listed here, just mentioned the ones related to the municipal hall, and that is affecting the structure. And at the moment there is scaffolding up, which Barnfield had put up as a work on their property, which adjoins it. So I do wonder if, even if you're not prepared to accept the rest, that you would make an exception in the case of that. It seems sensible to do it while that enormous amount of scaffolding is there and could be used without any cost.
Yeah, Sarah?
Actually, that was raised when we had our tour of the Muni, and it's something that Councillor Albin raised with Alison Good, and she just said, "Oh no, we're not going to use that scaffolding." So that's just a bit curious.
It's still there.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant, and that is still there. The question I was going to ask is, obviously, this is the month, and I've been doing loads of praying that we hear from central government about the Levelling Up Fund, which potentially could yield £2 million to help the Muni. And here we are in the middle of the month nearly. Are we days away from hearing from central government? We're days away.
Chairman, 27th, I understand.
It's the 27th.
That's budget day. That's when we anticipate a few announcements.
Okay. I think you're absolutely right. Of course we should use the scaffolding if it is still there. But we're days away. I don't know what a practical solution is. It might be a no, of course.
Well, I think if you could perhaps approve it on the basis, with the proviso that if funding through the Levelling Up Fund comes through, that it be paid for out of that.
Okay.
We don't know what the conditions will be on the Levelling Up Fund money, but if it could be that, it's done.
That seems very reasonable. Councillor Alban, as soon as he saw that scaffolding, he said, "Why aren't you using it?" So I think that's a very reasonable solution. Just a couple of little observations. A consultant chap that I know from an architectural crimes group contacted me about green energy grants, and he just secured £650,000 to create, I think it was a ground source heat pump, so sustainable energy for Blackburn Council Town Hall. And he said, "Why aren't you doing this?" And I put him in touch with the team at Combe Town Council because their boilers are end of life. So these grants from central government for green energy are around. I didn't get a sense from that report that that is something that the Leisure Trust team were looking into. I would love to have the confidence that that was the case, apart from which it's money from somebody else that's not from us, and it helps us be more sustainable for the future and fulfills our sort of green criteria, the fact that we have a climate emergency working group, etc. So I would love to see that. And then just looking at that spreadsheet, it just seems so very light in terms of detail, in terms of proper quotes. We don't actually necessarily have gone out to tender for some of these really big sums. They're not trivial. You know, we were having a chat earlier and I was saying to Karen, you know, if her kitchen was going to cost £20,000 or £30,000, that's not a trivial sum. These aren't trivial sums to this council. And I think it's right, genuinely, that yes, we see a gift horse in the mouth, which is the existing scaffolding, but at the same time, we really do scrutinise the fact that there should be tenders and there should be that detail. And that's what makes me not feel comfortable about the just offering largesse at this point.
Thank you. Councillor Wick?
Thank you, Chairman. Well, it seems that the Coleman prices are determined to defend the indefensible. They have completely just disregarded one of the fundamental reasons why this was called in. And that's because the review that is being talked about, and I'll quote the words in the report that we had at the last committee meeting, and it was that a further strategic review of provision in Nelson and Colne should be undertaken with a view to exploring further the scope to develop a new leisure centre to replace both sites. Now, at the same meeting back in September, Chairman you and the controlling group of this council also green-lighted the investment of 2.1 million in wavelengths in Nelson. Now, clearly, the writing is on the wall for the leisure centre in Colne, and that's underlined by something that David Corbyn Price said in terms of it's no good putting a sticky plaster on, and there needs to be a fundamental review and this and that and the other. So you need to get your ducks in a row. Are you saying we do this review, one leisure centre for Nelson and Colne, and presumably, because you're approving 2.1 million investment in wavelengths, it's going to be in Nelson? Or are you saying, well, we'll do a strategic review because Sport England say that we've got to have one, but we're not actually going to implement its recommendations? It's a review looking at one centre for Nelson and Colne. Clearly, black and white. You don't want people shaking their heads. The second part of the calling, and Councillor Tom Whip's here, and he can speak to the reasons for that, but the second part of the calling challenged the the appalling way that you said, oh, well, no, we're not approving this, we're not approving that, we're not approving the other. And it's like the Conservative group have got experts in the construction industry, they've got expert accountants, they've got experts in trees. I don't know what they're not expert in. And it's like the consultants, the people who work for Pendle Council or who are paid by Pendle Council to actually advise on building repairs and building maintenance, despite their expertise, that is being set aside because somebody in the Tory group knows better. Now, that cut hundreds of thousands of pounds of essential repairs out of the programme of investment. And Councillor David Corbyn Price said, well, all these facilities are of a certain age. Well, I'm of a certain age because I've attended the opening of every single one of those facilities. And as far as I'm concerned, in my head, they're still brand new, even the one that is 40 odd years old. So, Chairman, they are worth investing in. It is penny wise, pound foolish not to carry out repairs, and I would propose that we implement the programme in full. And I'm really staggered that Mr Morsdale has to plead with you in the meeting tonight for you to actually give the green light to do the repairs on Colne Unit. Chairman, I just, it's with a sense of disbelief that I see the way in which this council is now being run is the experts in the Conservative group overruling the people who are paid to give us professional advice in order for us to make sensible decisions. And, well, I think Councillor Tomwick will pick up the other issue that is embroiled with this. But my proposal would be that we do go ahead with the list of repairs and essential maintenance in full, and if we can get funding from third parties, all well and good. Just as an aside, Councillor Corbyn Price introduced this topic. How many Phase 3 public sector decarbonisation schemes has Pendle Council submitted, or is going to submit by the deadline of 2nd of November?
Thank you, Councillor White.
Are you not able to answer, Chairman?
I can't answer that question, no, unless Neil can say this question. Don't
No?
have the answer for you.
No?
No. No, I'm not saying none, I'm saying I don't have the answer. I think these meetings seem to be discussed as to if somebody has a different opinion from another member, they are talked down. We've got a code of conduct. People are disrespected. Let's just get on with it. People can have different ideas. We don't have to agree with each other. Put amendments forward. That's what we're here for. We need to discuss options, alternatives, and then hopefully trying to come to some sort of consensus and come to a sensible decision. There's nobody in this room who doesn't want to support and back and invest in our leisure facilities. We want to see the best leisure facilities. We understand the underlying issues we have in Pendle in terms of the life expectancy, the rates of diabetes, heart disease, all these real tough issues we have. And let's not play politics and try and work together and try and do the best for our residents. In terms of not knowing who the experts are, I think, again, we can't pick and choose when we want officer advice and when not. On the previous act, we've got clear advice from our officers, and yet you've chosen to ignore that advice. But when it's somebody else, it's like, oh, you know best. It's not about knowing best, it's about having different opinions. Let's respect people's opinions and have a sensible debate. Councillor Tom Whip.
Chairman, I did have my hand up, but I'm happy to let Tom come in if he wants first.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. In listening to the discussion, there is some points from the last meeting that I would like to bring up again. But I first want to cast people's minds to Barnoldswick Town Centre, where we had a town square in disrepair, and there was Councillor David Whip and said, can't be done, too expensive, other priorities. And yet, somehow, we cobbled together a budget. And I think the key thing is, we cobbled together that budget before we went out to tender. You don't tender first. You see, do you have the money? Yes. All right, we'll approach companies to see what can be done. It's not... If you can't just go out to tender with no budget, no means of paying, because who will take you seriously? And I think that brings me on to the next point, and this is about the ground source heat pumps. This council has declared a climate emergency. It did so quite a while ago now. We've got a climate working group. And Sarah Corbyn-Price rightly pointed out at the last meeting that we need to be looking at the leisure centres to make them more sustainable and cheaper to run into the future. Now, Chairman, it's been established fact now that ground source heat pumps are indeed more sustainable, more environmentally friendly, and much cheaper to run than conventional gas boilers. Now, the Leisure Trust, in putting this report together, have asked for budgets to install ground source heat pumps at the leisure centres. I think Councillor David Corbyn-Price said, well, there's no estimates, there's no quotes for those installations. And I think that's looking at the wrong way round, because you can't get an estimate and a good quote for a ground source heat pump without employing contractors to do site investigations to get it off the ground. So you need that budget in the first place to get the ball rolling. Now, I completely agree. If there's money from central government to pay for that, absolutely fine. But again, if you want to get the ball rolling, you've got to put some budget there in the first place. I mean, it might be we give them the budget they're asking for, they hire a consultant, they do the site investigations, they get some quotes together, and the consultant, being the expert they are, know of these government grants, and they say to the Leisure Trust, look, you can apply for these, and these, you've got all the requirements, go for it, and we'll get our budget back. It's that simple. And if it's not, and they can't apply for the government grants, then I think they need to install these anyway, because, again, we need to reduce the running costs of the leisure centres, and heating is one of those big, crucial things, especially in the climate emergency, where gas boilers are bad for the environment.
Thank you. Councillor David Corbyn-Price.
Thank you, Chairman.
What about Saffron? Well,
Oh, sorry, apologies.
thank you, Chairman. Chairman, one of the reasons I came into this volunteering role here in the council was for this very reason. These are facilities which myself and hundreds if not thousands of residents throughout the borough have used for generations. Looking at the request for some of these investments, I'm sorry to say, Chairman, I do feel slightly embarrassed that we are walking away from investing in such facilities which are to the benefit of clearly the younger generation. As local representatives for our various wards, we'll have residents who have children who use these facilities. This is an opportunity. We have the 500,000 allocated. Let's use it. Chairman, you said yourself, let's put aside politics, but let's do that then, Chairman. Let's, for goodness sake, some of these facilities are going to close. This is the advice coming from those who are in occupation of these facilities. Who better to turn to for advice, Chairman? I would hate to see residents of my ward, of any ward in the borough, having to come across their leisure facility closed simply because we couldn't make a decision on something that we've already allocated. We've already allocated a sum of money that can be spent, Chairman. I'd urge colleagues again to take a long, hard look at the situation, because the advice is in black and white, and if we don't follow the advice, we've only got ourselves to blame. And of course, residents will be let down, unfortunately. I appreciate there's different views, there's different methods behind different funding, etc. Those conversations should and can go on. But here and now, these are matters that need to be addressed. Let's address them.
Yeah. Councillor David Holden-Price.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, in the spirit of positivity that you talked about earlier, let's first of all make sure that, in the words of Councillor Senior there, that I'm flabbergasted that he keeps on referring to the idea that the review mentioned last time is all about 2 into 1. That is not what the review is for, and the wording was wrong in the last one, and has been clarified since then by both Alison and Mr. Boothbell. So, making noises again doesn't help.
Number 8 on page 2. It's clear.
Rewriting history.
It's not rewriting. Page 2 of this report.
Rewriting history. It's in black and white.
We're looking at this report, Councillor.
I've looked at both reports, thank you.
Page 2, number 8.
So, I think this is a list of capital repairs that has been around for a while, and it's all part of an overall review of the operations of the centres. Otherwise, they are sticking plasters. Unless you address the fundamentals of how the centres operate and how they're going to be used in the future, not ruling anything out at all in terms of how they work. It has been impressed that the works at the Mooney are the priority item, and there are scaffolding activities there which could just be moved around the building, whatever.
It's in a courtyard, so we don't have to move at all, that's the point.
Perfect, okay. So they can be used in that set of circumstances. So therefore, I think we should move that the works of the Mooney should be done. £39,953. What a lifetime of accountancy has taught me. So I think that one should be done, and the rest are on the agenda, will be considered, and will be considered as part of the overall review of the operations of the facilities. That's one of the things that we are going to do as part of the budget working group and the associated activities beside that, is to look at how they operate. Because at the moment, we give them a £1.4 million annual support, and they are still at the moment recovering from COVID, losing money every single month, and we need to look at how they operate. And I know that our interim finance man is looking at this and having discussions with them about how they operate. I think that's a very important review. Because otherwise, you're just doing something where you should be thinking about what the overall picture is. You don't do any building works on a house, for example, until you know what your overall works on the house are going to be, as part of a comprehensive building programme. It may be, we know the council has a limited capital budget available, and spending some money right now on short-term fixes might jeopardise some of the real value-adding capital expenditure that could be done in the near and medium term. So it would be unwise to make decisions like that at this stage, because you might prejudice discussions and choices that you want to make in the future. That is fairly fundamental to how you use money. So I propose that we do grant the capex for the municipal hall work, 39,953, and that the other recommendations stand.
Okay, can I just add, just to be absolutely clear, I don't think what we're saying is there's an argument that we are saying this funding is going to be is not going to be given to the Leisure Trust. Further work needs to be undertaken, but I think what we need to do is that work needs to be undertaken as quickly as possible. We can't just let it drag on. If then, at the end of them discussions, further information, that then works still needs to be carried out, then we will have to make a decision. And if there isn't the funding from elsewhere, that funding will have to be allocated. I think that's my view on it.
Through the chair, I'm just a little bit confused because we've gone through a professional body here where trees at Klondike have gone through, you know, members, specialist members, and you've written off the trees to be coming down. This is a very similar story where the Estates and Property Services Manager has considered that all necessary are necessary and should be carried out over the next 6 months. So what's the confusion in this and the previous item that we've done before?
Can I have a try at answering
You
that?
sure can?
Yeah. I think, well, there were lots of talk about experts in the last tree-related discussion. And what we have here is the view of one person. So previously, in the last discussion, we had 3 experts, 1 internal and 2 external. And what we have here is we have 1 internal person with a review actually happening from Sport England. And so we will soon have further input that will be talking about the future and how to make the leisure centres more sustainable. We think that there might be things to spend money on at the leisure centres that haven't been highlighted here. So we would like to look at everything in the round, the things that haven't been highlighted, the things that have been highlighted, and take that expert decision when it comes back here. And then we'll be in exactly the same position as the Klondike trees, where we have lots of information.
Councillor Lee?
Chair, can I just have, I'm just a bit confused now. At last meeting, you said we are not here to close the 3 leisure centres. I'm telling you now we're going to keep those. Is that what you said last time? Okay.
Closing the leisure centre is not on the agenda.
Okay. So therefore we're going to have 3 leisure centres as we are.
We have got 3 leisure centres.
So our Mites Associates, the one you're proposing to pay £40,000 to, is one of the things they're looking at is merge 2 into 1. Is one of the options in that work they're going to undertake, is that one of the options to look at Nelson and Colin, close both and reopen one? Is there one of the options in there?
I think it's a wide-ranging review.
No,
and
I know, but ask a specific question. So I've asked a specific question.
I don't think there are any options at the moment. I think
So will they be in?
They are going to do the study and get all the information together, and then they will come up with a report which will have options in. But at this stage, there are no options.
Okay, so therefore for us to chair, for us to ask them to do a piece of work, we need to give them some boundaries to look at, some objectives and aims and objectives to look at. Is one of the aims and objectives to focus on 2 into 1?
No.
Now I'm getting...
You've had the answer, so I don't know what you're trying to get out.
No, I'm not trying to be political here, to be honest. I'm just getting confused here because, 2 reports and 2 separate things. So what I want to do, I want to I mean, I agree with Philip before, is give the agreement in principle. If we can find the money elsewhere, let's use the money to get these things done. I have no problem. I mean, I have problems, but because I know the Tory party wants to do this Max Associates, let's do that as well. And let's look at those things. But don't delay the work on the centres. How long is Max Associates going to take, Chair?
They're estimated between 3 to 6 months.
Pardon?
They estimate between 3 and 6 months.
3 and 6 months. So what are the implications of the buildings?
One of them's going to close, isn't it?
And building repair. So the question is, if they got leaking roofs now, how worse will they get? How increasing the cost in 6 months' time or 9 months' time? If the report comes back in 6 months' time, we're not going to discuss it then and there. It'll be another 2-3 months. So in 9 months' time, the election is going to happen. So you're talking next June, July now, okay? So the question I'm saying is that 1 year delay, realistically, how much more is it going to cost us? So I'm trying to be practical here and say, look, as you said, and I agree with you, let's take the politics out. These are our facilities, not as Pender Council. These are the residents' facilities. If you want to do something, then we've got to be honest. I mean, you know, I've got a council, and I agree to some extent what you said, David, and I agree with that you've got to look at, instead of putting all the money sometimes, you've got to look at what are the causes. And so that's why with the Max Associates, I'm generally against it, but on this occasion, I go with it. But I'm also looking at, when your roof in the house is leaking, you don't leave it for another year. The hole is going to get bigger. So I'm saying, we have a...
Why has it been left for many years then?
Listen, now you're being in politics. I'm not here. I've got no idea. I agree with you. I'm not here.
How long has it been leaking for years and years?
But Chair, you asked 10 minutes ago, you asked about, you said, let the public, I'm not here to blame Labour, Liberal, Tories here. I'm not bothered. That's a separate issue. We can do that all the time. And we do. All of us do it. That's fine. But here we've got 3 facilities, 2 facilities, whatever they are. And I'm saying, look, regardless of our own politics, I'm saying if the hole is there in the roof, in 12 months it's going to get double size or triple size. So how do we meet the need of the current problem and do the Max Associates, which is where you're coming from. And they're really saying, let's do the Max Associates, and they will tell us what the issues are, and we will then look at those. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that as well. But here, what I'm saying is, our officers, it's not about 3 or 5 experts. We've always followed our officers to some extent. Okay, we might disagree with them. So I'm here, Sir Chair, is that I think we need to do something. We can't just keep delaying it.
Yeah. I kind of get where you're coming from. I do. Genuinely, I do.
And this is not a critical statement, Chair.
I can see both sides of the debate. I think it's crucial that in terms of the works that need doing, the urgent ones, that we do consider them. So I think in terms of the discussions, the budget working groups, the discussion with Pendle Lake Trust need to happen as a matter of urgency to explore the options. I agree that we can't just let it go on indefinitely. A decision does need to be taken, and I think we'll have to be in a position where we then prioritise what is the very urgent stuff that needs to be done. For example, it might be that the leak needs to be done first, and there's other parts that might need to be done at a bit of a later stage. So I think we do need to keep that in mind.
Can I also just clarify as well? I think the Max Associates report is required for Sport England to consider giving us a grant. And clearly we want the maximum amount of grant from there. And if one of their hurdles is we have to do a report like this, then we will do it. The point I made before was the fact that we need them to answer the right questions. And there's been a lot of 2-to-1 scary stuff talked about here, but that's not our question, is it? Our question is about having effective and sustainable places to exercise and places to have some fun, etc. So I think that's the key thing, and that's what the project group is going to be able to do, as I understand it, unless the remit is the project group will be able to steer the structure of the report. Clearly it has an umbrella range of activities and things to look at, but we want to be able to steer it so that we ask the right questions. How do you make them effective and sustainable locations, and what do we need to do to achieve that? That's the key focus that's what consultants in my book should do. What we don't want is a broad ranging thing about the health and age of all the people in the borough, etc. We don't want that again. What we want is this detailed review here, steered by the project group and council officers, etc., and so they can get involved in it. And that way, we can then come back with some intelligent ideas about what CapEx is used for, be it repairs like these, or the activities that actually the centres get involved in.
Councillor Wick?
Thank you, Chairman. Some while ago I did propose that we implemented the investment as set out in the report in full. I'm not quite sure if I got a seconder for that. I hope that I did. I think it's important that we do carry out this investment. My understanding of the situation is that a survey was undertaken some many months ago now in order to understand what work was required. This was what came up. We've got some roof repair work that needs to be done. We've got boiler replacements, and as Councillor Tomwick pointed out, suggestions that they could utilise ground source heat pumps to provide a sustainable way of heating properties. So I can't see what's not to like. And then, as has been pointed out, the council's own property people have said all of it is essential and it should be carried out within 6 months. It really, I'm struggling without thinking, well, you know, one or more of these is going to be closed, so you don't want to spend any money, to understand why there is the reticence to invest the money. You know, surveys have been carried out, work has been identified, they're all in process, or they should all have been in process of drawing up specifications, going out to tender and commissioning work, except at the last meeting, Councillor David Colvin-Price put a spoke in the wheel and said, oh, well, we're only approving 136,000. And he had his little shopping list, and eventually he said which ones he was going to approve. So, poor old Leisure Centre at Colne, Pendle Leisure Centre, it gets short-changed. West Craven Sports Centre gets short-changed. It just doesn't make sense. And I think, Chairman, you're being conciliatory and saying, yeah, we should get on all of these. And I think that's what the committee should vote for. So, as an amendment, I'm proposing that we undertake the whole of the work as set out on the list.
I'll second that, Chair.
Okay. So we've got an amendment. So we'll take the amendment first. Was the motion seconded?
No, this one.
Sorry.
I'll second it, yes.
So we're going to take Councillor Wick's amendment first. All those in favour of the amendment, please show. Against? Lost.
It's not carried.
It's not carried.
Chair, my understanding is when it's 4-4, then the chairman has to
It's not carried. The majority.
casting vote. Is there no casting vote, Philip?
It does have a casting vote, but as of now, there is no majority for it, so it's been lost.
It's lost. There's no majority.
So if it's equal, then
Therefore, it's not carried.
Okay. So we go back to the original motion of Councillor David Colvin-Price. All those in favour?
Mr. Chairman, can I put a further amendment? Within the original proposal, there was reference to 3 councillors being represented on the steering group for this review that isn't, of course, looking at having 1 leisure centre rather than 2 in Colne and Nelson. Can I propose that those 3 representatives are all party.
Is that an amendment? Do you want to incorporate that within?
Would you like me to rephrase the 3 recommendations that are here?
Chairman, I'm going off what was originally proposed, which Councillor David Coburn-Price said, yes, we'll have 3 councillors on this working group and the project group, and we've got some members that we can put forward. I am proposing that, as has always been the case with the Leisure Trust, that the 3 members should be from each of the respective parties on Pendle Borough Council. I move.
So that's,
Can I suggest that we do have all parties represented as part of B, but that it's 5 members and it's weighted as 3, 1, 1. Like we have on other committees which have 5 members.
is that acceptable? Then we just got one. Will you accept that?
I think, Chairman, that the opportunity for all political groups to take part is welcome. It's regrettable that the Conservatives have to have absolute control.
So we're happy with that motion. So all those in favour of David Coburn-Price's with the 5 members, please show. Against? Okay, that's carried. Thank you for that. Okay, next item is recommended write-offs. This is the annual report we get giving us the figures for the housing benefit overpayments and council tax for the years which we haven't been able to recover. Any speakers on this? Are you happy with any questions there?
Yes, I do have questions, and I'm sure that you might think them silly, but I'd just like it explaining. So, if we just look at the 35,000 housing benefit overpayments, is that Pendle Council that's doing the overpaying, or is it Liberata?
Yeah, process standard.
So, in their contract, they're exposing us to paying back money that we have. You see what I'm saying? It seems to be a bit unfair that they're doing the overpaying, but we're doing the making up for that.
So I think it's a question.
But they also do the recovery work as well. Which is, you know, something we talked about in this report. How the contract deals with that situation, I don't know.
No.
Find out.
Just seems, you know, just looking at it as a sort of bystander seems a bit unfair. And then point three, yes, on page 2, a case is going to court and sort of recovery. I don't really understand, again, possibly being simplistic, how they could fail, because obviously there's a debt, you go to court, they over debt. What could possibly go wrong?
No assets, no job, no money.
So it's not that it wasn't proved that they owed the money, it wasn't that, it was...
I think there'll be a range of things. I don't know the details of all of these.
Okay.
Yes?
Can I ask a question about the final page? Obviously, we talked a lot about the 340 down being bit off, and I guess, you know, based on the efforts, we have to say yes to that. But it seems like we've got a further £9 million provided against that we're writing off 340,000. Obviously, that 340,000 is being written off against the provision, so it's not going to be a hit to this year's revenue, actually P&L. But it seems to be that we still have a further 9.026 million of provisions carried forward. So that means we've provided against the non-collection of council tax of 5.9 million over presumably many years. I seem to remember Dean showing me a spreadsheet once where this thing goes back years and years and years. and obviously efforts are still continuing, but am I reading that correctly? If so, if there is still 9 million provided against, let's have an understanding about what incentives there are to collect it. What are we doing to beat the barrata up to go and collect this money? Are there incentives to people to say, this debt's 5 years old, if you pay us something, we'll write a bit off, we'll take it to court, it'll be messy for both of us. All that kind of thing where we seem to be just sort of having that there as an afterthought there. Unless I've misread that table.
Chairman, could I propose that we defer this item?
Right, thank you.
Could I propose that we defer this item until we have a Chief Finance Officer present?
Possibly, and we perhaps clarify the position with Liberato as well. I just remember last year, I know this sounds trivial, but I remember reading this report last year and they said the reason that they hadn't collected some of the money, sorry to laugh, but the reason they hadn't collected some of the money was because people had gone abroad. And I asked where they'd gone, and it was the Isle of Wight. No, sorry, it is quite funny, isn't it? And that was in last year's report. So it would be sort of interesting to know a little bit more about it, I suppose.
And if they're back from the Isle of Wight.
Yeah. We could go and find them on the Isle of Wight, it's not big.
Delegate it to your councillor, find these people. So are we waiting for this? Are we very happy with that? Yeah.
We accept the right.
Sorry?
We're accepting the right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't we have a choice?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Next item is the draft local assurance framework, Nelson Town deal. At the previous meeting we have agreed the allocation of the funding of 25 million, which has been agreed. Now the process is that the business case for each project work has been carried out, and this draft assurance framework outlines the governance arrangements, value for money, etc., and the processes that are involved. It sets out the roles and responsibilities of parties involved. So I'm happy to move the recommendation. Any speakers?
Just a little bit of an update, which I think will really interest Nelson councillors. I heard yesterday that the Colorado site, which has been beleaguering Nelson for such a long time, is now under offer. And I wonder... Oh dear.
Sorry, if I may, Chairman, I'm meeting the new owners on site on Monday.
Okay.
So
there aren't
it has changed hands.
Changed hands. So I just wonder whether the sort of buzz around this town deal, I'm always a positive person, is sort of rippling already before we've even started. Because that's been a real worry for such a long time, hasn't it?
I don't want to say because we're being filmed here, but I can brief you after on the nature of the owners and what the deal is. But
that would be very interesting.
All those in favour?
Chairman, sorry, can I just repeat an off-the-cuff remark that I made at the town deal board was that this is creating an industry, might well be creating jobs, whether it's actually doing anything useful for the government to micromanage these schemes in such a way is not beneficial. It doesn't appear that people have learned anything from the experience of housing market renewal, and I think if there's any true levelling up going on, then this investment, such investment, ought to be made and people are allowed to get on with the job rather than creating a bureaucracy that just goes on and on and on and on and on.
Okay, we want item 7. This is the Townsford 5% capital prepayment and early project development costs. This initial 5% will help support the projects which have been identified by the Nelson Town Board, and the delivery of them projects is to get them off the ground. This payment is crucial. The payment will be made once projects have project confirmation, I believe. So you'll get the 5% initial payment, and we can start the groundwork on them projects. But just a question to highlight in terms of the financial risks involved in this 5% prepayment. My understanding is once we've had the 5% payment, once that money is spent, if for any reason that particular project doesn't get off the ground, that then will come off the overall 25 million. That's my understanding. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. And I think in terms of the 5% payment, our advice that we've been given by the interim section 151 officers is that they're quite comfortable with this allocation, this funding, this initial 5%. People happy with the recommendations as set out? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Item 8, Kelbrook and So Neighbourhood Plan. Sarah?
I'd just like to ask some questions of Neil. And I know that he's going to look at me sadly, because we've spoken about this before. We have very few neighbourhood plans in Pendle. We're a black spot, and there are loads of reasons behind it. We're not alone. They tend to be neighbourhood plans in villages, and this is one of them. And Code is a bigger neighbourhood plan as we prepare for Regulation 15. So as you know, we hired a consultant, and in fact the government's given us nearly £30,000 for our neighbourhood plan. Kelbrook and Suf won't be in the same position. So I had a little look. I haven't gone through it with a fine-tooth comb, I ran out of time. And I saw some of the comments. You know, for example, their green spaces, they are a bit sketchy. But then I thought, well, Matthew Kennedy is on their steering committee. So why couldn't he sort of like hold their hands and steer them away from the bit where they say, oh, we know best about flooding because we're local, which of course is sort of contrary to the MPPF. Could he not head them off at the pass before they went to Regulation 14 with some of this?
My understanding, Chairman, is that he has gone down the line with them on this. They're very adamant about that aspect of it, and
Okay.
it came as a, if I want to say, surprise to us with the wording of it. We knew they were interested in flooding, quite right, and obviously it's a big issue, but the wording of it and the requirement, for example, to consult, effectively rewriting secondary legislation is not something that we were aware was coming forward.
Okay. I mean, it's a shame, just as people who haven't been involved in neighbourhood plans, the volunteer people, lots of them have experts on particular fields. It's an incredible amount of hard work. It's a labour of love. And this council needs to encourage people to embark on the journey. We know, we've tried to encourage Lane Bridge, and they're just like, yeah, we'd like to do it, could somebody do it for us? No, it has to come from you. You have to do it. And I know that you've got staffing problems, I know that I just would like to really think about how we could help, generally as a council, groups such as this that have embarked on the journey, but also other groups that are too frightened at the moment to put their toe in the water. It is an immense amount of work. There's no point hiding it from people. We just need to help them. And, you know, I read this and it just read as if they hadn't, you're saying they haven't listened, but...
No, Chairman, it isn't as simple as that. We're not involved in the writing of it. We go and advise, and they have various people, very enthusiastic, very nice people who go away and write those. They also have their own planning experts.
Oh, okay.
So they don't rely on us a lot, and the drafting of it isn't something we vet, and we haven't vetted until it's come within the Regulation 14. We're not being overly critical, we're just saying smooth some of your policies over in effect.
Okay.
And we're recommending changes to that. For example, the green spaces.
It is sketchy, I've read it.
It is.
Yeah.
I use your word, it is sketchy.
Yeah.
But they can do work on that to make it more robust for the Regulation 15 or 16, whatever it may be, finally.
I just think we need to encourage more people to come forward to do neighbourhood plans. And you read this, and actually if you were a volunteer, you'd be a bit crushed, wouldn't you? You'd be a bit crushed to read this, even though I know it's correct with the NPTF, what I can see. And I just think that we perhaps need to stand back. I know you don't have any time to stand back, but stand back to think about how we can encourage neighbourhood planning in such a way as perhaps we don't have this scenario in the future.
Yeah, I think it's probably what the debate is. We do have different enthusiasms with different parishes and different, Combs, very enthusiastic. Barnoldswick is, Barnoldswick hasn't chosen to do it. There are different reasons why different towns, it's not that they're not aware of the process, and as you said, the biggest thing I think is local commitment. Not having the expertise we can guide on that, it's having the commitment to do that, or the wish to do it.
But we sort of want to encourage it there, don't we?
Well, once you have been to Lentford Bridge, we had I think you were there, we had a meeting about neighbourhood plans and the local plan. Just absolutely adamantly not going to do it. So different areas have different...
And that now is a different council as well, with new councillors, so perhaps it's always worth having another go. Anyway, that's just my observation.
Thank you, David. Councillor David Wood.
Thank you, John. Is there anything on the table? Has it been moved?
I think we're just having a discussion about this morning.
Yeah.
Well, Chairman, I'm very disappointed that the report is recommending that Pendle Council doesn't support the neighbourhood plan as drawn up by the people in Kelbrook and Suf. And I wonder if we can arrive at a mechanism to have discussions so that Pendle Council comments are, if I say more helpful, Neil, I don't mean that the comments are unhelpful, but they're not what the people in Kelbrook and Suf want to hear. So I wonder whether it would be possible for Pendle members, together with Neil, appropriate people, meet with the appropriate people from Kelbrook and Suf to see if there's any meeting of minds that could obviate any difficulties in terms of the future process.
Is that something that would be useful and helpful?
We've got a time scale before the end of the month. We have to make comments, and I think if we didn't make the comments, they wouldn't have the opportunity to amend the plan. This is the point about this, Chairman, that they can go away and I think relatively straightforwardly address these things. Just get some more robust evidence on the green spaces and clarify what the policy is about. That's one of the key issues. You can't not conform to the upper tier plan. That's straightforward. It will be thrown out by an inspector. And then the third point about flood risk. I don't know where you take that, other than it's just not lawful. They just will have to change that. So the comments are made that they can amend it in order to make it a robust plan. So I wouldn't say it's totally as a criticism. It's a way for them to try and take it forward, but happy to meet if they wish to. But we need to get the comments in the 6-week consultation period, Chairman.
Any other speakers? Okay. Councillor Whip suggests that we have a meeting with the local residents and relevant people. Are we happy with that? Okay.
Well, that wasn't offered to Karen in terms of a formal thing from policy and resources. I think it'd be always good to meet with them anyway. Of course, they're one of your neighbourhood plan working groups, but I know that you have to get the response in within the deadline, so you don't want to slow that down. If it would slow it down, you don't want to, do you?
Well, Chair, I see this. If we miss the boat, the comments don't go in, the plan stays the same, we'll spend, and they'll spend a lot of time at the hearing with the inspector having to address the plan. I really don't see this plan being able to go forward in this way. And indeed, when if it did go forward, we may have to recommend that we didn't adopt the plan. So it is important, I think, we do get these in and give them an opportunity to comment. And the door is always open. We have had Matthew Kennedy has had lots of discussions with them. We've never closed the door. Goes to meetings with them, and I'm happy to meet them. I'm not clear what members would do over and above a meeting with perhaps myself, local councillors, just to go through the issues. That might be the way to deal with it. But we need to get the comments on the table so we can address them.
Okay.
I think just echoing what Neil said there, I think you have to submit the comments anyway because there is a deadline for the consultation. It's gone to Regulation 14, the public will comment, council may comment, and obviously the council itself will comment. So I think we have to submit something to it in order to help them get to the next stage. Just exactly like the code model as well. I mean, we disagree with some of the comments, and we sort of reshape them, all the extra documents were found, etc.
We really boosted our evidence base.
But I think it's given us lots of lessons to learn. We have revisited this, we have extra reports on long-range views, extra reports on viability, etc. It's all coming through beautifully to support the next stage, Regulation 50. So I think we have to submit the comments. But I would, echoing the idea of meeting with the local council, is have a discussion with them about this is why we're submitting, this is what it means, this is what you should do, here's some help in terms of what to do next. So I think around that response, to actually have a meeting with them and show them the support, etc. is there.
Okay, so it's a recommendation for us to have the extra meeting with Neil and Ward Council. Yeah. Is that okay with everyone? Yeah, all those in favour? Thank you. Next item is the local development scheme. This is to agree a revised scheme. Neil, do you want to introduce this report, please?
Sure, there's not a lot to say. We have to have an LDS in place to coincide with what we predict will be the timescale of the plan, so it's really more a box-ticking exercise than changing or shaping the timing of the plan.
Sarah?
I, as you know, am incredibly reluctant to be on policy resources. And one of the reasons that I'm reluctant is because through the post there is a thwack on the mat at the Coburn crisis, like that. And obviously it takes hours. And then perhaps you think that I am a bit batty, but I've read some of these reports before. I don't remember this one, but certainly the Treasury one is a lot the same every single year. And then I go through that thing where I'm thinking, I've read some of this before. It's a bit like watching a film, you don't know the ending. And here, I hadn't read some of it before, but then what I would really like to have known, and it's the same with the taxi one, is what's changed. So if you sort of underlined all the bits, see, or if you had a little bit that said, page 6, page 9, page 12, this is all different, it would be so much, I wouldn't just be reading it afresh each time, looking at it, thinking, and wondering whether I've remembered it correctly.
Chairman, I can supply the old LDS. It really is a lot of hard work, simply to say when your plan is going to go forward. And obviously we had to go and look at the housing numbers again. That delayed us for a couple of years, to be honest with you, through this process. And it's just shifting that timescale now to reflect that. So
okay.
I can send you the old LDS.
There were things that, no, but I think generally with all these reports, the ones that come cyclically, that are the sort of ones that just keep coming round again, and then they're updating them, it would be great to know exactly what had changed. So, and there are things which I think possibly here still are legacies. So if you look at page 52 and page 51 and page 50, a lot of the thing here is all talking about political management by the executive members for planning and housing. And I'm a bit concerned because there aren't any, as far as I'm aware, any executive members for planning and housing. And so that bit then isn't really relevant.
Sorry, Chairman. Portfolio plans we have, and obviously that's the design principles that we've got. So it does have a history to it as well. personally, professionally, I think this is a big waste of our resources to produce something that at the end of the day is simply telling us when we're going to take the plan forward. As the AMR, a lot of that work is a lot of work and is pretty abortive, to be honest. But this is the critical element of this is on page 3940. It's not paginated, which is the timetable. Before we get to page 40, which is the timetable.
So I've got a slight update about the Code Neighbourhood Plan, because we're in here and we're mentioned as around now, and we're so close, but then we've had bad news in that you might remember that I've mentioned that we're this sort of new methodology for viability. So they've done all the baseline study, and now, sadly, the chap who's doing it is having to nurse his dying mother, and there's nobody else that can do it. It's his work package, it's his baby. Nobody else has ever done this before. Cone is the first place. So he just rang me and just said, I just honestly don't know how long. I don't know. So I think realistically, David was looking back. This is the only report we're waiting for. We've done everything else. So I think realistically, looking at the full councils of Cone and so on, we won't be able to submit it to Cone before the 21st of December, which means that probably it won't come to you till Christmas. So, New Year. So I thought it'd be a little present for you.
It's like Christmas presents.
So sorry. So that's another slippage, and I apologise for it, but it's not our fault.
Okay, so we happy with that? We go to vote?
There's a few questions and comments. On page 3, just of the covering paper, we've got these SPDs. I know they often get referred to. I know the conservation area one does in particular. A couple of other suggestions. I mean, add to the list of things to do here. But could we potentially have SPDs covering things, there are really topical ones that keep coming back to this committee and other area committees, etc. They're almost like giving guidance to people when they want to do things and submit applications. Possibly one on retail shop frontages. Whether there's anything we're giving on guidance like that, in the suggested cone area by the cone bid. Something to help on that.
So, Chairman, we refer to the design principles. We have got one. So there is one in the design guide on specific on shop frontages.
Good, okay. And the other one was extensions to domestic properties. We get an awful lot of extensions on domestic properties. People come with all sorts of shapes and sizes, and it's almost like just establishing some principles to help people. That's all. Whether that's covered by the design principle, I don't know.
Chairman, it is. It doesn't. It's not about proportions and architectural styles and things. It's about relationships between buildings. Because you have that many styles, it's difficult to actually put something forward. But there is guidance around distances to windows and overbearing relationships and overshadowing, etc. in the same document. One half is shop fronts and the other half is residential extension.
Absolutely.
I was just going to say, Chairman, we do already have those policies and the principles set out. It's just that very often when these issues come to committee, very often, not always, that committee approves or indeed there's a last notorious case turned down in our case. So I think the principles, the policies can be as definite and as black and white as ever, but councillors tend to be motivated by things other than sticking to the policies.
Yeah. Okay, so all in favour, please show. Against? Okay, that's fine. Item 10 is bids for Barnoldswick and Nelson. The recommendations are before us.
Chairman, can I thank you very much for bringing the report. I think I've asked at the umpteenth previous meetings to try and revive the possibility, no more than that, of a bid for Barnoldswick. And as it says in the report, I mean, we were on a bit of a wing and a prayer when we got to the stage that we did pre-pandemic, whether it's even more precarious now. I don't disagree with what's suggested in the report in terms of trying to get that bigger set of businesses interesting and involved. I've got a question in terms of, we did commission somebody called Chris Corlec to work on simulating interest and doing the survey and producing the work that has been done so far. What's to stop Mr. Corlec from continuing where he left off?
He's got a job.
Well, he had a job when he was doing this.
Yeah, but it's not this.
Got a different job.
Chairman, my understanding of his consultancy, he's wound his consultancy up, so he no longer does work on this. Unfortunately, he was very good.
Okay.
I mean, from my views, I think the bid is a good opportunity, especially coming out of college, to assist and help businesses. Corn's a good example of that, where it's doing really well. I think there is an opportunity here for Barnoldswick, which I think we should explore further and try and look wider, businesses outside the town centre itself. That's the first recommendation, so I'm happy with that. In terms of the second recommendation, in terms of Nelson, I think there is a good opportunity for Nelson, and all the recommendation I set out is saying that it be deferred for consideration. I can see the reasons why that's being said, but having said that, I think it is something I believe in Nelson should move forward and try and progress, and at least have some initial discussions with the business community to see if there is that interest for them to have a bid in Nelson. And I think there is a good time to have that. The report does refer to, we used to have in Nelson a group of businesses, I can't remember the exact word for it, but they used to meet regularly. Yeah, Townsend. I don't think it's met that often now, but I think there is an opportunity for us now to contact the people involved in that and see if that can be revived and if there is any interest from the business community in Nelson. So I would amend recommendation 2 and say that formal consideration of a bid for Nelson be developed and discussions be held with businesses in Nelson.
I'm happy to second that, Chairman. Can I just come in? Sorry, I did have my hand up.
Yeah.
At the Town Council meeting last night, Chairman, Neil was kind enough to approach Nick, who's our Assistant Town Clerk at the moment, in regards to the potential of funding around support, with regards to the feasibility and the other parts of the process, and we did support that request. I chaired the meeting last night. I agree with you, Chairman, that it is an opportunity for Nelson to try and turn a corner insofar as businesses go. There are some very important businesses in Nelson. There are others which have sort of recently come to the fairground, I'll call it. But in terms of how we move forward, I think it is important that we do consider not just feasibility, but also the sort of route map to a bid here in Nelson, to maybe change attitudes to bring that pride back into the sort of retail side of Nelson as well. So I'm happy to support you on the amendment, Chairman.
Yeah, I think in Nelson, I think in perhaps the other parts as well, I think it's bringing that information to people, because I might be wrong, but I suspect a lot of the business out there won't know what bids is, what it involves, what the benefits, what the costs. So I think that discussions would be helpful as a step forward, just to see if there is that interest there. So,
I'd like to invite you, Neil, to our next board meeting in Combe. It moves about, but you'll find out, paragraph 2, that we're not all about retail at all. We do make a really big effort to represent all different sorts of businesses. and I am more than happy to get a sort of big roadshow over to Nelson. What we did when we started on our journey is we got Skipton to come and tell us, it's a bit like neighbourhood plans, there are loads of positives, but there are, you know, some things that you need to be aware of. And if you look at Barnoldswick, it's absolutely true that we need to write to those bigger businesses, because in our bid area, we're one of the smallest. We've got 370 businesses. Now, Nelson will have more, so you should be a slightly bigger bid area. But the critical thing is, you need to have those prime movers from those different sorts of businesses. So if you look at our bid board, we've got like Sainsbury's, and we've got teeny tiny market something, and lots of things in between. We've got professional services. So all these people bring something else. It's the bids that fail are the bids that are run by the council. It has to be driven by those businesses and their different concerns. And it would be a waste of time, I think, to take the Barlick one forward at all if those bigger businesses on the periphery were not interested, because the cost of running the bid would be too great, the billing and so forth. It will be interesting to see. A lot of companies have it as part of their corporate responsibility. So the companies like Greggs, for example, they have it as part of their corporate responsibility that they always say yes to bids. Weirdly, they're not interested in getting involved in the cone one, it's just something that they do. But really, in a sense, it is a bit like Robin Hood in that case, because the benefit is quite often to the people who pay less, but actually the benefit is a ripple effect, it's to all residents, because if you've got a more vibrant town, it's a nicer place for everybody to live. And bids do have really different priorities from council, let's warn you that now. I think that the Nelson Town deal presents a wonderful opportunity for Nelson to reinvigorate people, and I think there's no time like the present in terms of making those connections. I think that Pendle Council should run a campaign to have like a big workshop or a big conference or a big half day or I don't know what here, and do social media, really try and get some interest in big or small businesses from Nelson. And we'll come over from Cone, we'll do a little presentation, we can take Q&A. Let's try and get people enthused about it.
Thank you, Sarah. So I've moved. So the council has moved.
I support everything what you said. And about 2 months ago, or 3 months ago, I actually said, brilliant, we need to do something about Blyfield as well. And you said, we'll have a look at it. And in all these reports you come along, and because they are our towns, we're not in competition with anybody. Okay, Nelson is ours, Corn is ours, Barley is ours. I think, Chair, Blyfield needs all the support. And I would suggest we need to do something with Blyfield, because honestly, there's a lot of good work going in Nelson, Cowan and Barlick. And Blyfield, the smaller brother, is struggling. So we need your support to look at it.
Yeah. I mean, I think in terms of Blyfield, I might be wrong with this, but in terms of, if you look at Barnoldswick, that's got a town centre, it's got more businesses than Blyfield, and we feel that is too small as it is at the moment, unless the bigger business from outside the town centre want to be part of it. Blyfield would probably struggle being too small. That's
Chairman, my initial reaction, Barnoldswick struggles without the big businesses, and it's bigger certainly than Bradfield. We can't see a big.
Chair, what I'm saying is,
capacity there.
yeah, what I'm not saying we are whatever there is, because every time this happens, the smaller towns, the small parishes always lose out. And I understand what you're talking about, but there must be something somewhere, to look at smaller towns architecturally. If you look at Blyfield, the amount of churches and the amount of architecture we've got is probably the oldest churches in compared to some of the other towns. So there must be something there to get the town up and going. It's dead, and I can't see it, lining up in the next few years without any help or support from Pendle. The big brother needs to step in to help the smaller brother. So if you can ask officers to only genuinely have a look. You know, we did a 10-year plan, for example, 3 years ago, we charities that, okay? It just sat on the shelf. This point between these plans, where's the sport behind it? So what I'm saying is, not necessarily this, but if we can agree that something, wherever that is, we need to do something for the smaller towns. It's an important part of that.
I agree, it is. Any other speakers? Okay. So we've got a recommendation and a motion on the table, so all those in favour please show. Thank you. Okay. Next item is item 11, additional restrictions grant. Before we speak of it, I've just got a couple of questions which I'm hoping somebody can answer. In terms of funding we've got available here, this is it now, is it? So I'm just asking these questions so everyone else understands it as well. This is the final payment we have. At the budget working group, one of the council comment who was mentioned in terms of using this additional restriction grant funding for various other things, and said, look, can we explore further? Can we look into what this funding can be used for? So my concern is that the budget working, them comments were made. I don't think we've looked into other options, exactly what this funding can be used for. So if we allocate the funding tonight, that's my concern, that's it, it's gone and it's done. There might be some other projects or funding that we might wish to spend money on.
Jeremy, there are clear parameters around this. We can't have it, parishes can't have it. It's got to be for businesses or directly relating to businesses. Charities, we've got some legal advice from Mr. Culshaw, they can benefit as long as the businesses and they're helping COVID recovery. One concern I have, well, a couple of concerns, Chairman, there is a short time period, we have to spend it or lose it. And we have, I'm sorry to say this, one of the members of staff who has dealt with it, the previous chief executive, and Hassan dealt with it before, with no expertise really in that, having only a short time period, and we haven't had a great deal of resources to do it. So, Chairman, I wouldn't want to see us delayed till Christmas and then really not be able to implement it and lose it.
Chairman, I was asking the budget working group about this one. I hadn't read this report at the time that we met. And I agree with what Neil's saying. I think 31st of March 22 is the final deadline. We got the £500,000 extra because we were successful in dispersing all the funding by one of the previous deadlines, and the extra £500,000 was made available for business support. I mean, this is what the report is covering tonight. In terms of events, there's a suggestion about £80,000 for events. Do I understand it that they would have to actually be carried out and the money disbursed prior to 31st of March, or could it be put into an event that takes place later in the year? And the final thing on that, Mr Watson said, well, parish and town councils aren't eligible, but indeed parish and town councils are eligible, or have been eligible for various elements of support. And I mean, I know several that have done that, so I can't see why parish and town councils wouldn't be eligible to apply, if they're doing something that is appropriate, that is.
Do we have the answers?
I will need to get some more legal advice. And my understanding of parts of government, and we're not supposed to defray to government. We can't administer things. That's why you're looking at perhaps bids for events. Interesting point about the wording in the guidance. It just says defray, I think, by the 31st of March. Looking at other councils who are doing similar things filed, they're all saying spend by, not defray by. Just you tell me that. Although I'm aware that I think one council, could be Bradford, one of the bids there is indicating that they can spend the money later. My view is at this stage we should aim to do it by the end of March and to be legal very soon.
But can we just clarify that point so at least we know?
Yeah, I've asked for that.
Yeah, John.
Actually, it was me that raised about Bradford because it was soapbox starving. And we've now looked into it, and they brought their soapbox starving into March to spend this money. So, and they have looked into this. You have to spend it.
Yeah.
So, for example, Coma's got a light festival in February, run by the bid. So presumably that can apply into this pot. It's in February, and it's not run by the council.
Thanks, David.
Yes, I think one of the ones you said, time is of the essence. I'm a bit concerned about paragraph 11, where we're again spending money on external consultants to try and do this when it's already in a sense been invented by other councils already. Some of the ideas put in the appendices I think were quite good with them. I quite like the file ones. There's a good spread of activities there, which I think could be useful for us to just basically do almost like a file save house of their plan and put the word pendant instead of file. So I think there's a number of ways we could hit the ground running in terms of defining what our potential schemes and initiatives are. I think paragraph 10 obviously puts a set of 3 down there, comes up with some made up numbers of 80 and 50 and then just puts the rest of the businesses. I think possibly what we should do is almost like try to be a little bit more flexible in how we allocate those times. So if suddenly we get a load of events coming in, we don't really want to stop people if the businesses aren't coming forward with 311. We want to maximise our chances of spending the 400 odd. So I would suggest that we almost keep our powder dry in terms of committing to numbers and caps and pots, and that we almost have the themes coming through of events, charities, businesses, and any others that we think some of the other councils might have that are useful. So I'd almost propose really to get the ball rolling that we almost scrap recommendation 1 and almost flex number 2 by saying that designing the schemes or headlines for the schemes and the administrations are delegated to the chief exec, perhaps working with you and anyone in the economic development. And I'm happy as head of the budget working group to think how to spend money in a sensible way as well.
Jim, just one point about the external consultants. Every council that I'm aware of uses the gentleman concerned so to bring the legal framework forward. And it gives us some assurance then as well that we're not spending or doing something that's out of line with government requirements. So I'll be frightened to not to use it.
So you can hit the ground running for us, is it? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think obviously time is of the essence and we need to make sure we don't lose everyone's money, we don't spend it, we lose it. But if, for example, if there's a concern that one particular aspect of the funding isn't being utilised, we're going to have to look at it again. So, and I'm sure if that happens, then we can have another report back and reconsider it.
I think it's possible that there are these other pots, sports, for example, shop fronts, for example. I think it would be great to have a little bit of input into the priorities from the administration. Obviously with business being the number one.
Yeah. David?
Thank you, Chairman. Together with Iqbal and myself, you took part in the often lengthy discussions that we had throughout the whole of the process of the local restrictions grant and the innumerable iterations or reiterations that there were after that. I think Chairman, it would be entirely appropriate to retain that as part of the process. So instead of leaving it to Rose to get on with things and sort of tear her hair out, as we were doing earlier in the year, that it should be in consultation with yourself or nominee and the two other group leaders, and then we can agree the way forward and ensure that there is that transparency and we're all singing off the same hymn sheet.
David?
I would suggest that would add lots and lots of time. The prospect of having these sort of consultations will drag it out till the 30th of March.
No, Chairman, that's absolutely untrue. We used to meet on Teams. It used to take 10 minutes, quarter of an hour at most, and done and dusted. We all knew where we were going, and it is entirely wrong to say that, oh no, this will kick it into long grass until next March. It's an open and transparent way of doing it, and I think if you're talking about best part of £500,000 of public money, then there ought to be that participation and that scrutiny and that engagement with all three groups on the council.
Can I suggest, Chairman, that given that we are the administration, that we retain the proposal that the final details of the scheme administration of the ground be delegated to the Chief Exec, the head of the budget working group and the external consultant to agree.
I can see a calling coming.
Okay, I'll second that.
Calling, get it written. Do you really want us to call it in?
Don't see why you need to.
Well, because we're not content with the decision. We don't think that it's transparent. It's the Conservative group. It's the Conservative group dispersing best part of £500,000 without scrutiny from other members of the council. And quite frankly, given the fact that it's been mentioned that a bid can put in bids. Councillor Sarah Coburn-Price is a prominent member of the bidding cone, and Councillor David Coburn-Price is going to sit on the group that sort of draws the things up. Quite frankly, if you can't see that stinks, then you don't have a nose. Chairman, it needs to be open and transparent.
Can I just seek advice from Philip in terms of the ARG grants that and the meeting which Councillor Wick is referring to between the group leaders? My understanding is that was done in that way under the emergency powers because of COVID and work meeting in person, etc. And that was the reason why the group leaders, under the council's emergency powers that were being utilised at the time, so the Chief Exec in consultation with group leaders or the administration.
No, it was group leaders, you were involved.
Yeah, and they were being consulted, and that's my understanding. I think it's different now because we are meeting in person, we are having meetings, it's on the agenda, we're having a discussion, and that's my understanding. So I just want to clarify, am I right in what I'm saying?
Okay, so it was under the urgent powers provision of the Constitution, and that applies at well as a majority group on the council, it will be with all the group leaders. If there is a majority, then it's just with the leaders. That's provision in the Constitution. I suppose just also mention that if it is called in, officers aren't allowed to do any work on the issue until it's been considered again by policy and authorities. So that would cause a delay until late November before we move any from tonight.
In terms of what Councillor Wick has said, in terms of possibly calling this in, if Councillor David Coburn-Price's motion is passed, can I seek advice from you, Philip? Are there sufficient reasons, do you believe, for the calling? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Well, it's for the callers in to say what the reasons are, and I don't know. who the callers in are going to be and what reasons they'll put forward until they do that, if they do that.
I think the reasons Council Brooks made it clear would be on the basis of a significant amount of public money being allocated by the chief leader, whoever, their grounds for the calling.
Well, that is a reasonable ground for the calling. It's an arguable point.
Okay.
You can't rule it out of one.
Just a more fundamental question from our own information. In terms of the calling process itself, my understanding it has to be used in exceptional circumstances, and is that not right? Is that what the local government tax? It has to be exceptional. I've read that, that it has to be exceptional circumstances, and just want to have a better understanding in terms of how the calling process fits in with a committee system. You can normally see it in an executive arrangement. But is it because we've left it in our constitution? Is that the reason?
Well, we didn't just leave it in the constitution. It was a conscious decision by the council to retain the calling procedure. When the calling comes in, the procedure is referred to the 3 group leaders, and 2 have got to accept that it should be accepted, and that then goes on to a meeting with the callers.
I'm just conscious of losing time, so I don't want to go down the road from being honest of a calling and wasting time which we don't have. So I'm hoping we can find a compromise somewhere between.
I think Chairman, it is straightforward. Involve the other 2 groups in consultation with the Chief Executive in drawing up and implementing the scheme. Straightforward.
In terms, so council, going back to what Councillor David Colvin Price is saying, so you're saying the money obviously is there, you're saying have flexibility in terms of how that money is spent.
Yes, I don't think we should allocate it to any individual pot. The appendices contain several where there's a sort of pot arrangement, but there's also, you don't get the sense that there's this amount of money there, this amount of money there. So therefore, some degree of flexibility to maximise the ability to use the full 440,000.
So we just have one lump sum people can apply from
with the
for
different
events,
criteria.
charities, businesses.
I think we're changing some recommendation 1 parameters to themes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I just feel that it's lovely to have in the last administration, which was a coalition between Labour and the Liberal Democrats.
No, it was a
they
shared administration.
invited.
It was a shared administration, Chairman.
You invited our leader to come along as the 3rd person, but essentially, obviously.
No, he had to like.
Right. But now we're in a position where we are the administration and we're being asked to give 2 of the 3 seats to the opposition, which doesn't really seem very fair. You know, for example, on Combe Town Council, there is an independent town councillor, and she isn't allowed by the Liberal Democrats to go to any committees at all, which is a bit harsh. She's a very nice lady. Yeah, it's the same in Nelson Town Council, isn't it? You don't allow the Tories to go to any committees.
That's not true.
That's not true.
That's not true. Point of order. That's not true.
So all I'm saying is that we are the administration. So to ask us to have 2 people who are, could the numbers be looked at? So it would be 5 then rather than 3. Would that be the sensible thing to do and make it speedy so it's next week and done?
put it forward. Is that your?
Would that be my amendment
Yes.
to David's?
Oh well,
You can always amend the
Yeah, the amendment is that.
Yeah, so it's
Oh,
part of the resolution.
yes. Why don't we do yet another committee structure of a 3-1-1 to reflect the fact that we are the administration and the minority party wishes to have a voice.
Councillor Mead.
Sorry, so what's the proposal on the table?
I'm confused. But
Okay,
I think the
because obviously
proposal
it's 9:30.
yeah, I think
We're just going in circles, so I just want to know exactly what it is.
I think the proposal is that the funding is left as a global figure, and the detail is worked up between the chief exec and 5 councillors, 3, 1, 1.
Yeah, it's
So
delegated to the chief executive, which has to delegate
In consultation.
in consultation with town council.
And the external consultant.
So that's the proposal.
And the external consultant?
So could you now, because that's on the table, Chair, because we're just going to go to second, do you want to take a vote on that?
Is there a second?
Just to make progress.
Yeah, second, okay. Yeah, so we've got that on the table. So all those in favour? Against? Okay, thank you. Next item, performance of transport staff in taxi and private hire vehicles standards and policy review. I think this is a policy which needs to be reviewed now and again. I think the last time we reviewed 2016, 5 years ago, and I think something we have got a responsibility that we should review and make sure our policy procedures are robust, because ultimately the duty is upon us as a council to make sure users of taxis, private hire vehicles, etc. is the paramount consideration. So it goes out to consultation, and then once that's been done, we'll discuss it again. I've got a quick question in terms of, there's a suggestion in here about CCTV cameras for taxis. I think some other councils have done it, possibly.
Some chairmen, some not. I'm reasonably ambivalent about it. We don't get that many incidents over the years involving where CCTV will work, but then an incident, we'll go into the details of the week, where a taxi driver said, actually, it would benefit me. So I think we should countenance the trade and see what they think about that. Because obviously there's a cost to them as well. So take a view and then bring it back and have a debate about that.
Yeah, I think when I read that was my concern, is the cost element of it. And obviously it's up to the trade group consult them, and we'll see what comments they have to make. Okay. Thanks, Larry.
No, that was the question regarding funding, so we'll see how that transpires. Just out of interest, Neil, I'm presuming other councils that do have CCTV provision in taxis, the drivers themselves have had to fund that, is that correct? Or is there something out there?
Or operator, or both, yes.
Okay. No councils have ever participated in funding aspects?
Well, we won't be able to afford it.
No, I'm not saying we, but I'm saying in other examples.
I'm not that I'm aware of, but I don't know every council's position, I'm afraid, but not that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Next item.
This was another really hefty read. I just wonder, you know, a lot of it's sort of happening on page 4 and in various places, but I did want to read it all. It would be so useful if we could have a sort of little overlay document of all the things that have changed. I know it's in the boxes, but in the main.
I have a tracked version that I can send you.
Okay. But I think what I'm trying to say is that generally, when we get these reports, it would be so helpful. I don't actually, and I've read the whole thing now. Generally, it would be so helpful, especially these ones that come around again.
Chair, can I suggest that in future, all the documents are just sent to Sarah, none of us? She loves reading, fine, we understand that, so we can have So Neil, from 20 years ago, just send everything. Okay? So it keeps her busy.
On a serious note, I think she's asking tracked.
No, yeah.
And it is helpful.
Okay.
Yes,
That's a Christmas present from us.
Chairman, through you, I suspect the report will probably be double or triple the size with track changes. This particular envelope definitely damaged my letterbox. So maybe we should have some sort of
There's a claim coming forward.
Okay. So all those in favour of the recommendation? Yeah, thank you. Next item is public spaces protection order holidays. I'll read the recommendation. Okay, thank you. Next item is item 14. This is an interesting read. It's different policies, policy teams across county. Important work that's been carried out across Pendle. I'll read the recommendation. Sarah?
I have never met Wayne Forrest, but I'd really like to, because a lot of this is about antisocial behaviour. And in Cone, the neighbourhood police team and the Beard and loads of other people recognise that the charity Cone Youth Action Group has driven down. There's mention here with the Pendle Youth Forum with whom we work, but we are almost like a little test case of driving down antisocial behaviour in a town, and the police recognise it, and it would have been great if the Cone Youth Action Group had made it to this report. I suspect that Mr Forrest doesn't know about us, and perhaps he'd like to come to Cone and we can walk him around and show him all the places and all the things that we're doing, and it would be marvellous and interesting for him and interesting for us.
I think in fairness to Wayne Forrest, he's the head of the temporary head of the policy unit at the moment. I don't think he personally gets that involved in that sort of.
Does he have an underling who'd be interested in coming to Cone?
Yes.
Excellent! Please invite said person. Thank you.
I can assure Councillor Sarah Coburn-Price that the Antisocial Behaviour Officer is well aware of the Cone Youth Action Group. The Community Safety Partnership has put resources into the Pendle Youth Forum, and I'll just mention this for Councillor Neve's benefit. The current concentration of activity for that body is in Brianfield, and so Councillor Councillor Neve cannot say that nothing ever gets done in Brianfield.
It's true, I've heard it too.
We know.
One detail one on the community safety partnership work. In the Cone one, obviously has continued throughout. It's the only one that's a sort of separate town board, as it were, and that's through the sterling work of Jerry Stanford over many years. He now has decided to step down as the chairman. So we've got a new chairman coming in. But could I suggest that, given he really did keep that one going, to regular discipline or whatever, that a vote of thanks is sent to him by you as leader for his many years of work and with the way he brings people together and also feeds into other initiatives as well. So
happy to do that.
Yeah, Chairman, Jerry's role is as a subset of the Community Safety Partnership overall, and we will be discussing an appropriate resolution at that body.
Okay, so all those in favour?
Yeah.
Thank you. Next item 15. Climate Emergency Working Group. These are the minutes of the meeting, and there is a recommendation on the table as well. Sarah?
Yes. This amazed me, this report that actually was on our desk when we came in. Jane gave it to us. But we already had it at the Climate Emergency Working Group. And I really learnt a lot from it. And I think if I could draw your attention to page 3, where helpfully it's been put in bold, the paragraph that emissions from a GTL vehicle are 91% reduced compared with diesel, which is amazing. It really is amazing. And we considered all of the problems that could be held by electrifying our fleet, numerous, expensive, uncertain, recharging difficulties. And this to me seems such a pragmatic and relatively inexpensive solution where we could show leadership and really reduce our emissions. And at the same time, in the report, it does say that as more people move to these fuels, it's hoped that the cost will come down. So we'd be early adopters. And the section about the reduction of cost here is in the section that says what are the costs. So the indications are that they will reduce over time until it reaches parity with conventional diesel. So yes, we have to buy the tanks at £400 and take an immediate hit on it, but the feeling is that long term this shouldn't be an extra cost to the council, but we will have saved all that emissions and that will be a massive success. So I really would like to propose that we adopt this.
Can I just add to that? Obviously, there is a potential spend, an extra growth under the budget at £80,000. I think if the mood is to accept that, then obviously we as the budget working group across all parties must work a little bit harder to come up with ideas to save a bit of money. I do know that we still have the allocation for a new officer to come into this group, and the climate emergency delivery officer, which I think, Neil, in the previous meeting you said one of their remits was to get some grant funding and anything like that, so if they can come through and obviously develop those extra funds, that would be brilliant to support this kind of initiative. So yeah, I support the move to do the extra funding.
Councillor Lee?
Chairman, I'm not sure that the proposal will lead to a reduction in CO2 emissions by one jot. We are still burning fossil fuels if this process is adopted. The reference in the report is the reduction in nitrous oxide emissions, which is no doubt beneficial in terms of air quality, but in terms of the climate emergency, cutting CO2 is the key thing, and not putting more carbon into the atmosphere. So I'm really troubled by this, and I think that I'm not going to say it's a scam, but I think we're just trying to sell something and under rather false pretences. And I think that it needs a good coat of looking over, and not just sort of jump up and down and say, oh yes, what a good do this is, and let's get on with it. I do think people need to understand what is actually proposed here.
Can anybody help? Because
Well, it's here on this page here. It's talking about the fact that it's used cooking oil. It says there's a reduction in greenhouse gas CO2 emissions by up to 90%. So it's something that's already had a use. It's fried chips or something, and then it's put through a hydrogenation and isomerization process to improve impurities. The process breaks down existing molecules and builds them up again, leaving a final product with consistent carbon chains, but without the impurities that are common in traditional diesel and biodiesel.
I'm confused now. Neil, can you help? Because
it's beyond my chemical capabilities.
I was quite clear that it's going to be a good thing, but from what Councillor Wick is saying, he's saying something completely different.
Sorry, no, it's not my bit of expertise.
It's a bit like DRAX, Chairman, where it's supposed to be a good thing, but it's pumping huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere.
Councillor Ali?
Thank you. I'm sorry I can't help you either, but I do have some further remarks to make. The final page of the report suggests that a growing number of UK operators are trialling HVO. That to me doesn't mean anything. I don't know who's trialling it. In fact, the two examples given for Bournemouth suggest that they'll explore the environmental benefits. So clearly there's some sort of uncertainty or lack of conclusion there. London Borough of Hackney, whilst it operates 90 trucks and all the rest of it, it goes on to state that evidence from independent trials conducted confirm that the fuels of CO2 benefits are even better, etc., etc. But what it is concerning is, as colleagues have mentioned, the use of cooking oil will be used and refined, or whatever the process is, but it mentions down towards the penultimate sentence that the switch to HVO fuels will require some initial fund of 150 grand for storage tanks, where will they be kept? A further annual sum of between 56 to 97,000 needed over the next 3 years for the fuel. Now, whilst Nelson is said to be the food central, I don't think there's going to be enough cooking oil in Nelson to provide for his HVO fuel. I don't know where we're going to store this stuff, which brings its separate concerns. Chairman, I think it's probably a little bit too early to be jumping up and down with joy about HVO, just based on their own testaments there. Those testaments are not clear at all as to what the actual benefits are. Surely there will be some bigger councils than compared to Pendle Borough Council that will have seen noticeable improvements and contributions to the climate emergency by way of HVO, and I would have wanted to see more sort of confident testaments, and that not being the case, I think there probably is a bit more to be looked at here, Chairman.
Any other speakers? Mitch, we do have a proposal on the table that we approve the funding. I think possibly the way forward. Do we pause and then have a debate?
Funding for a trial.
Yeah. That's why we're only spending £400 on the tanks. Just like Bournemouth have done a trial, so have we.
Sorry, how much is the trial costing?
Sorry?
How much is the trial costing?
£400 for the tanks, £28,000 for the uplift on fuel over a year. But the feeling is that uplift will decrease to be the same as diesel over time.
What about, what about the storage and everything else? All those costs on top of those? Where's that coming from? So the last paragraph, you report, the last sentence. I'm just looking at the big guy. To be honest, I missed that out. For whatever reason. As much as I want to move into positivity, I think, Chair, and this is not political, again, it's something we can't wait and look how others are doing it, because we are in a very severe financial difficulties, and everything we look at, anything from £2,000 upward, we say we got a working budget group, which we've had for the last 4 or 5 years. Is it worth, I know it's £28,000, but it's not the 28, it's the 97 and it's the 200,000, whatever that is.
No.
Where's that going to be? Where's that coming from? If they're going to convert and add the fuels for £400 tanks, where they're going to store everything, so it's not just the tanks we're going to look at, it's all about the storage, it's all about everything else. So I'm just suggesting, can you just defer this and bring it back and let's get more information. We don't need to rush into this. If it's going to help us, help our trucks, help the town, help the environment, it's a good thing to do, but I'm sure we can wait a few months to get as much more information so we all can make a more informed decision.
I mean, my understanding, this was discussed at the Climate Emergency Working Group, and we had support from there.
Mm-hmm.
So we have, so the council, we set this working group for a particular reason, to assist and guide council and make policy decisions. And my understanding is that they did have support from there, unless I'm corrected. Sarah?
What appeals to me about this is it's not one of those things where you could say, oh, we're making this step forward and there's no going back. So, the risk management here, it says, it's reported to be a safe alternative, there are no modifications or special storage requirements needed, and vehicles operating on this fuel can return to diesel if required without the need for the tanks to be drained or for vehicle modification. So, if for whatever reason, I don't know, say the price of this skyrockets in March, it's not something that we could say, oh my goodness, that was a terrible decision that was made. It is something that we can monitor, it is something that we can write a report on to give us that information of whether we should move down this path for our vehicles. I think it's the responsible thing to do. And it is a trial, as Mr. Moosdale said.
Sorry, I think rather than us just go for such a trial, which is costing us almost as close as £30,000, why don't we forward that money to the PLT and then concentrate on other organisations, other councils who are running this process and wait for their results, and we can pump our money into the PLT?
This is a point of fact, though, the 28,000 is the increase in the fuel costs. So if you cut it short, you only spend a few thousand or a few hundred even. So if you get your quick results to say it's not working, then you don't spend 28,000. You're spending a few hundred there. And if this council is so keen on climate emergency things, with the huge percentages this will save, then and the climate emergency working group supports it, then
so it's just based on the current costs. Current annual costs.
Yes, and they feel that this fuel will get cheaper as more people use it.
Chairman, another question in regards to the two vehicles that were tested by Gore Plant and this particular fuel. It mentions a Johnston 651 and a 652 truck-mounted sweeper. Do we know what our sweepers are? The reason why I asked the question is clearly there's a bit of a pretense with all of these figures that that the fuel was trialled on these vehicles and therefore the results were led from these vehicles. If we don't know what our vehicles are,
Make it just all diesel vehicles, isn't it?
well, based on the report, I don't know. Maybe not.
I mean, they could be Ferrari.
But clearly, Chairman, different vehicles have different mechanisms and engines and all the rest of it. I don't have the knowledge on that, but I don't know. It's just a question. But if we don't know, we don't know.
Chairman, I found it a lot cheaper using that red diesel. I have to say, it's an off-road vehicle and
Yeah.
Yeah, just from experience, all your diesel engines will run off coal. You can do it tomorrow. In fact, when the discounters used to get in 5 litre bottles of corn oil, they went off the shelves just like that. All good quality diesel engines will run off plant oil without any modifications whatsoever to the engines, without any damage, without anything. Been around a long time. It's not particularly new, and good quality diesel engines now will run off that without even a blink. It's always worthwhile if you limited problems, but it's as simple as that. But we've got experts in somewhere in this week, so they should know what can be done.
May I make an amendment to my motion, which is that we adopt this and we review it after 6 months, and then we know we've only spent half the sum of money.
Okay, just to make progress, can we go to the vote, please? That's the amendment. All those in favour of Sarah's amendment?
Well, you can't. You're not going to lose anything.
Against? Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. The next item is driver shortages. We've got a report before us. This is a national shortage. We have managed to recruit 2 drivers. It's an issue which we will need to keep a close eye on and regularly have updates, especially if the situation deteriorates. So it is something that we will need to keep a very close eye on. Sarah?
I have mentioned this before. I really am keen on this. I just feel that we should offer a small-scale apprenticeship scheme where we pay the tuition or testing costs, and then offer golden handcuffs to the people who are our graduates. It won't be an immediate solution, but in a few months' time, it absolutely would, and we're fostering training and career development within the borough.
We are doing that to an extent. apprenticeships without their existing staff, and that's what, resulted. I have to say that, 6 to 8 weeks ago there was quite a bit of panic around this, but things have calmed down because of people going on that apprenticeship scheme, and also certainly 1 and possibly 2 drivers coming back, having realised that the grass isn't necessarily green around the other side.
So do we sort of tie them in for a little period, or?
Yeah, anybody's on an apprenticeship is expected to stay for that time for qualification.
Splendid, thank you.
Councillor Lee?
Just a quick one, Chair. Are we up to scratch with all the drivers
We are at the moment, yes.
at the moment? But obviously we need, okay. Because obviously this is going to go. If they're getting £50,000 somewhere else, and that's what they're offering nowadays, so there's a good chance we might lose a few. I am. I'm going to the next week.
Well, I can tell you that one who went for apparently for 10,000 a year more came back.
Oh.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. I think that was the last item.
Yeah, can we have training course for councillors to go on?
Volunteers, yeah. Thank you, councillors.